you had a fascinating video about the Israelites when leaving Egypt. They received gold from the Egyptians and they turned that blessing into something more evil. What's the story behind that and what's your conclusion?
Um, yeah, great question. I was just reading Exodus, and this goes back a couple of years. I was reading Exodus, and up until that point, I hadn't really given much thought to, like I knew as a kid, I grew up in church, and so I knew kind of the basic stories. I knew the golden calf, and I knew, Jonah and the whale, and I knew Jesus walking on water. And so one of the things I've realized, as I've just been, an adult and I've been in ministry and I study and I read, I've realized that there are a lot of things that I learned as a kid, I learned about that I didn't I think because I thought I knew it as a kid, I didn't take the time to seek further understanding, as I've grown up. And so now I've kind of gone back and I've looked at some of those things and I started asking questions. I was like, you know what? I actually don't know where they got all the gold to make that golden calf because they'd been slaves for, a couple generations. Um, I was reading Exodus and it says in Exodus 3 when Moses meets the Lord in the form of the burning bush, and the Lord is giving him all these directions and instructions. And one of the things he said, when you're leaving, have the women ask your neighbors for gold and silver and jewelry and clothing, and I'll give you guys favor in their sight, and I'll send you out. You won't be empty handed. I'll send you out with plenty. And so you keep reading and you go through all the 10 plagues and all that, and then you get to, I think it's Exodus 12, and you see that happening where, Moses instructs the women, "Go and ask your neighbors for all those things, the gold, silver, jewelry, clothing, and they'll give it to you. You'll have favor in sight of and you'll have favor in their sight on behalf of the Lord." And so, the Exodus happens and they're parting of the Red Sea and all that good stuff, and they're going, and if you know the story, the Israelites, they don't really get what's happening. There's this thing that I say that I think uh, there's a lot of parallels between, I think, modern day, at least Western Christians and the Israelites, and that I think there are a lot more people today that believe in the Lord than there are that believe the Lord. And so I think there are a lot of people that believe in his existence and his reality, but don't necessarily care to actually follow and obey and trust him. And so, they're grumbling, they don't understand. Moses is going up on the mountain and he's gone for a long time, and they just don't understand what's happening. They don't really see the big picture. And so, Aaron instructs them, bring your gold, bring your jewelry, and we're going to create this idol and we're going to worship it. And then he actually gives credit, which is crazy to me. He says, he makes the golden calf and he says to Israel, he says, "This is the God who rescued you from Egypt." And I read that, I'm like, what? Like, how are you drawing that conclusion? That's crazy. Anyways, I've seen a lot of parallels with that story, and again with like the modern day church, in that I think it's the Lord's desire to bless us. He's the giver of good gifts. It's his nature to love, and one of those expressions of love is to be generous and to give, right? John 3:16, for God so loved that he gave. He's a lover, and so he's a giver, and that's just who he is. And so, throughout our lives, I think we'll have opportunities to look back and realize that our lives have been marked by his goodness and his mercy, and he's a generous God. And I think one of the things that there's this temptation in church, and I don't know what this is like where you are, but in America, there's this like prosperity gospel that's being preached. And, basically like you've got these you've got these people in the church who are seeking the Lord not for him, but for what they can get from him. And what they're taking, and because he's a God who is generous, and because he's created us with the capacity and ability to create wealth, right? He's creative and we're creative because we're created to be like him. And so we're creative and we have the ability to create wealth. And I think that the Lord has greater purposes for the wealth that we have than we often give credit for. Like the gold that he sent the Israelites out, that was meant for the construction of the ark and the tabernacle, and you keep reading in Exodus, and the Lord's giving Moses all these detailed instructions, and there's a lot of gold required. And so part of it was he didn't just want them rich, but he wanted them to be equipped to do the things that he was calling them to do. But they took that blessing, what was meant to be used to worship him and create this ark and to create the tabernacle in a place where his presence could rest. And they took that and they made an idol out of it and they worshiped the gift instead of the giver. And I see the same thing happening today. I just think there's a lot of people that unfortunately want a relationship with God to the degree that they can get from him what they want. When in reality, like, that is such a shallow approach to such a good and loving God who has so many bigger thoughts and plans for us than for us to just have, material things. Not that that's a bad thing, but, there's I think he has bigger thoughts and a bigger picture in mind.
Because then in Deuteronomy, Moses serves up a warning to the Israelites as they about to go into the promised land that when they have abundance of food and their livestock multiply, not to forget the Lord with who gave them all of these things. And it's a real warning, which, you said you can see the correlation between today's date, but it's a real warning not to confuse the gift and the gift giver.